So welcome to Sunday morning at Atlanta Soto Zen Center. This is May 25th, 2025. And today we want to talk about what is considered to be the most difficult of dharmas, the dharma of married life. I have been married twice. My first marriage was 1960. When I was 19, my wife was 19, childhood sweethearts. And in 5 years or so, when I first met Matsuoka Roshi, we already had children. At the time of the Vietnam War, I was exempted from the draft by being a student, first by the Kennedy administration. Secondly, I was married, second time. The third time because we had already had a child. And those were the exemptions, so my number never came up. I assumed that it would, and I was kind of ready to go, but it never did. A lot of my friends went to Vietnam. Some didn't come up, high school buddies and like that. So it was high school sweetheart, married too young, had children too young, ended in divorce, and 1975, some decade or more later, was remarried, my second marriage, which turned out a lot better. And that's a phenomenon that's not limited to myself alone. Several people in the room might attest. We've had four or five, maybe half a dozen of my senior students, males, have gone through first marriage, divorce, second marriage, and the second marriage has typically worked out much better. So I think it takes me at least to a kind of position of looking at marriage as something which I'm not sure we're ready for. I'm not sure we're cut out for the married life. I'm not sure, but certainly the alternatives are not that great. And no complaints. I'm very happy in my second marriage, and as I tell people many times, there would be no Zen Center, no Zen Center without Diane. She's done all of the bookkeeping and back office work all along for all of the years we've been in operating since 1977. So in 2027, we will have our 50th anniversary of the Atlanta Soto Zen Center. And it takes me to Schopenhauer, of all things. Anyone familiar with Schopenhauer? Yeah, I knew you would. Nobody else? Okay. Well, he's a minor philosopher, I think, considered a minor philosopher in Western philosophy. But Diane, my wife, won a set of Encyclopedia Britannica's great books, the Western books from Plato to Freud, and sitting on the shelf there mostly, right? But I picked them up one day and started looking at them and opened it up and it smelled like tobacco. Whoever owned them before, it was obviously a smoker. She won these with an essay she wrote in one of the universities she attended. And as an aside, a factoid, she also wrote a paper on Zen when she was in college, long before she met me. So I got to looking at them, and they had a 10-year program for reading them. And they would start with Plato or someplace, and it would take you to a different place. It was not linear. It's not the way the books were published. And they had these conceptual ways of reading them over a 10-year plan. They had, I think, more than one. So I started looking at them. And I was very impressed by certain things such as uh, the confession of Socrates was about wisdom, about being the wisest person. The oracle had declared him the wisest of all the philosophers. And he went around and interviewed all the other philosophers known at the time. And amongst other things, he reported that not only did he not have any real wisdom, they didn't either. And this caused him to a little cup of hemlock served to him. But they said he was how did they put it? He was distorting the youth or something. He was misleading the youth, and that was a crime. So that sounded very Zen to me, that true wisdom is no wisdom. And then I came across this the idea as the world as idea, the world as will, which is Schopenhauer's masterwork, and came across several things in it that struck me as being very Zen-like. And I think Schopenhauer is referred to as kind of the Zen disciple, or Zen philosopher influenced by Zen. He quotes he quotes Taoism in here. He quotes the yin yang of Taoism and so forth. And he quotes the I Ching. He quotes some of the Upanishads and so forth. So he was obviously 19th century. It says here Schopenhauer, the pessimism, the ill temper, very Zen, right? I'm not getting it all the way here. Pessimism, the ill temper. No, ill temper, the sallies of poetic insight and of realistic perception, the obsession with the obsession of sex, the fulmination against academic philosophers, and the failure to exemplify their virtues all seem to be functions of the life Schopenhauer led and the man he was. Born in Danzig on February 22nd, 1788, he was brought up in the family of a wealthy merchant. So he mentions the 19th century in here, and so he bridged the 18th and 19th century. A shriek of insanity ran in the paternal side of the family, and the death of Schopenhauer's father in a canal at Hamburg seemed to be a suicide. In his life, Schopenhauer was moody, high-strung, and so great a lover of liberty that when the free city of Danzig lost its independence to Poland in 1793, he moved to Hamburg. So there are sort of resonances. You can see them. Don't worry, I'm not going to hold all these. I read this some time ago, and just going back through it for this talk today, I just found, as you often do when you look at a book you've once read, many interesting things that I think I want to maybe save for a later talk, just on comparing Western and Eastern philosophy. But today I want to home in on this idea of marriage, the drive to marry, to reproduce, and so forth that he deals with in a few of these quotes. And this is an interesting one. It kind of gives you, I think, his connection to, somewhat of his connection to Zen and Dogen and so forth. He says, the form of the object, again, is the principle of sufficient reason in its various forms. Each of these reigns so absolutely in its own class of ideas that, as we have seen, the special form of the principle of sufficient reason which governs any class of ideas is known. The nature of the whole class is known also, for the whole class as idea is nothing more than this form of the principle of sufficient reason itself. So that time itself is nothing but the principle of existence in it, the principle of existence in it, that is, succession. Space is nothing but the principle of existence in it, that is, position. Matter is nothing but causality. The concept, as it will appear immediately, is nothing but relation to a ground of knowledge. This thorough and consistent relativity of the world as idea, both according to its universal form, subject and object, and according to the form which is subordinate to this, the principle of sufficient reason, warns us, as we said before, to seek the inner nature of the world in an aspect of it which is quite different and quite distinct from the idea. And in the next book, we shall find this in a fact which is just as immediate to every living being as the idea. This sounds a little bit like Einstein's informed by the order behind the appearance. A little bit as if he's anticipating relativity. He speaks of space and time several times through here. I'm going to skip over. I'm not going to go through these. Those are for later. I'm going to forget too, I think, what Zen is pointing to in the practice of studying the self. Hence arises the strange fact that everyone believes himself or herself a priori to be perfectly free, even in individual actions, and thinks that at every moment they can commence another manner of life. In other words, shift gears, which just means they can become another person. But a posteriori, afterwards, through experience, find to astonishment that they are not free, but subject to necessity, and in spite of all resolutions and reflections, does not change his conduct, and that from the beginning of life to the end of it, we must carry out the very character which we ourselves condemn, and as it were, play the part undertaken to the end. We cannot pursue this subject any further. Good. So that sounds to me very much parallel to the concept of self in Zen or Buddhism, that we think of ourselves as having free will, and yet we find that more and more as we mature and look at things from an experiential perspective, that all our life we have been driven by motives, causes, forces, and so forth. It goes into will here. I think we could take the definition of will as Schopenhauer is using it to be similar to what we call motive formation, mental formation. It's the underlying impulse, the underlying desire that drives everything. And as we say in the Repentance and Refuge, is born of body, mouth, and mind. It comes from this being incarnated as a human being or as an organism. But biology, simply. There's an interesting one here. I'm just going to quote this one because I often refer to the process that we're undergoing when we do zazen. It's like building a charge on a capacitor. And at some point, the capacitor is full and the spark has to jump. So that's the idea of concentration in Zen. It's like a concentrated super solution, salt solution, for instance. We become concentrated over time. And when we become concentrated, something has to give. At some point, something has to give. So this is a way of encouraging patience, stick-to-itivity, so forth. Um, just stay with it. He says here, talking about repentance, he says, therefore, by true repentance, which, however, shows itself as action also. Repentance is an action which could have a goal, right? We could be repenting in order to gain something. Uh, it Therefore, by true repentance, which however shows itself as action also, it can be liberated as a falsely drawn line from that picture of our will, which our course of life is. So he's saying the way we interpret our course of life to be a matter of our will is an illusion. He says, I may insert the remark here as a very good comparison that the relation between the wish and deed has a clearly accidental but accurate analogy with that between the accumulation and discharge of electricity. It's coincidental that he used the same analogy a couple of centuries ago. And before we go into some of the things having more to do with marriage and so forth, though everything may be regarded as irrevocably predetermined by fate, yet it is so only through the medium of the chain of causes. Seems very much like a 12-fold chain of codependent origination. Therefore, in no case can it be determined that an effect shall appear without its cause. That it is thus it is not simply the event that is predetermined, but the event as the consequence of preceding causes, so that fate does not decide the consequence alone, but also the means as the consequence of which it is destined to appear. So this sounds very much like Buddha's explanation of karma. Accordingly, if some means is not present, it is certain that the consequence also will be present. Each is always present in accordance with the determination of fate. This is never known to us till afterwards. That begins to sound very much like causality in the three times, causality over the three times, according to Buddhism. So then this is an appendix at the end, metaphysics of love of sexes. So warning, if Barbara used to refer to her students as little wallflowers. You had to be very careful what she said. It's not to offend them. We have all these what do they call now? They're not spoiler alerts, they're warnings. This may be offensive. They're warnings. This may be offensive to somebody. But finally, what draws two individuals of different sex exclusively to each other with such power is the will to live, which exhibits itself in the whole species, and which here anticipates in the individual which these two can produce. The individual, the child, in other words, which these two can produce. An objectification of its nature answering to its aims. This individual, and this is a theory at that time, will have the will or character from the father, the intellect from the mother, the corporization from both. Yet for the most part, the figure will take more after the father, the size after the mother, according to the law which comes out in the breeding of hybrids among the brutes, and principally depends upon the fact the size of the fetus must conform to the size of the uterus. So I think that's some of the science of the time. And Mike, you probably have some better mileage on that today. It's what they thought at the time. The main thing he's saying is that what attracts you to another person and results in marriage, childbirth, and so forth, we think is our own desire, our own attraction. And he makes the case elsewhere in here that opposites attract a different. You see characteristics in the other person that are different from yours, but complement yours in the sense of DNA and so forth. And so that's what causes the attraction. In fact, we have seen in this an instinctive lesson concerning the inner nature of all instinct, which, as here, almost always sets the individual in motion for the good of the species. For clearly the pains with which an insect seeks out a particular flower, fruit, or dung, or flesh, or, as in the case of this, I don't think I can say that, Ichneumonidae.
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 Ichneumonidae is a family of wasps.
Yeah. The larva of another insect. They seek out the larva of another insect in order to deposit its eggs there only. And to attain this end shrinks neither from trouble nor danger. So for clear the pains with which is thoroughly analogous to the pains with which, for his sexual satisfaction, a man carefully chooses a woman with definite qualities which appeal to him individually and strives so eagerly after her that in order to attain this end, he often sacrifices his own happiness in life, contrary to all reason, by a foolish marriage, by love affairs which cost him wealth, honor, and life, even by crimes such as adultery or rape, all merely in order to serve the species in the most efficient way, although at the cost of the individual, in accordance with the will of nature, which is everywhere sovereign. This is an interesting sort of principle he's plucking out of that. Instinct, in fact, is always an act which seems to be in accordance with the conception of an end, and yet is entirely without such a conception. Nature implants it wherever the acting individual is incapable of understanding the end or would be unwilling to pursue it. Thus, here, as in the case of all instinct, truth assumes the form of an illusion in order to act upon the will. It is the voluptuous illusion which leads the man to believe he will find a greater pleasure in the arms of a woman whose beauty appeals to him than in those of any other, or which indeed, exclusively directed to a single individual, firmly convinces him that the possession of her will ensure him excessive happiness. Therefore, he imagines he is taking trouble and making sacrifices for his own pleasure, while he does so merely for the maintenance of the regular type of the species, or else a quite special individuality, which can only come from these parents, is to attain to existence. So I wish I'd read that when I was 17. Might have understood a little bit more about what was happening with me and my high school sweetheart. And it later came to an unfortunate end. Not terrible, but not great. So I thought I would open it up from that to a general discussion of the Dharma of married life, the Dharma of family life, the Dharma of relationships. I think it was you might know philosophy better than I think it was Khalil Gibran who said, your parents are not your parents, your children are not your children. I think he was expressing the same thing. Your child is independent. That's their life. You cannot own that life. Your parent, as you obviously witnessed with your own parents, you cannot really control their lives. And if we get into the sandwich generation, which many of us now in the 40s and 50s are running into, trying to take care of parents, trying to take care of children. I would say 50%, but quite a lot of my online Dokusan dialogue are around those kinds of issues when people are caught in those kinds of pressures. And we've had several people come here and be in residence here while they went through the process of divorce over the years. Fortunately, it seemed to help, and they all turned out positively. So I don't think this should be a taboo subject. I think this should be something we want to discuss. Let me just leave it there. If anyone wants to testify from their own experience, ask any questions. Most of the focus on is not psychotherapy. It's not a love life advice column. It's not anything like that. It's more like trying to see it a different way, trying to see what happened and what you did, what you didn't do, what they did a different way from a Zen perspective. Hopefully, a more non-dualistic perspective.
Do know, not from a divorce standpoint, but from the standpoint of being single most of my life. The thing I struggle with is being in a relationship in a space of, if in a relationship in which the few I've had is like, that is doing some of the deeper work, but as one of my mentors put it seems to go to a place where, questioning who's getting the benefit
Right.
in the relationship, and if it's not centered around the I, me, or my, if that starts to kind of subside to the back a little bit, then I've found that for me it's hard for me to be in a relationship, and so I'm kind of curious
Yeah.
how do you be in it but not of it?
And that seems to be the part of the dilemma. I go to something very absolute and abstract on that, and it's Dogen's four transitions: to study the ways, to study the self. Study the self is forget the self. Forget the self is to be enlightened by all things or actualized by the myriad things. Different translation. And to be actualized by the myriad things is to remove the barrier between self and other and go on in traceless enlightenment forever. Okay. So most people, I think, interpret that third line or the last line to remove the barrier between self and others, plural. Kumbaya, kumbaya, can't we all just get along and so forth? You're like me and I'm like you and so forth. I don't think that's what Dogen meant. He meant that even if you're Bodhidharma sitting alone in a cave, thousands and hundreds of miles from any other human being, there is still self and other. The fundamental bifurcation or relationship that we face in our consciousness, our conscious existence as a sentient being, is the separation of self and other. So we are to resolve that relationship. If we resolve the relationship of self to other and become comfortable in our own skin, comfortable with our own mortality, aging, sickness, and death, and so forth, then all the other relationships fall into line from that, because now you have something to offer a relationship. You don't need the relationship. All you have to offer is need that distorts the relationship. And then you can have a complementary kind of relationship with anyone. That's my theory. It's very fundamental and kind of abstract. I think that rationalizes a lot of the celibacy, individuation of the monks separate from the nuns and so forth in the history of Buddhism.
I kind of look at it in very terms, and in some ways, you have to look at relationships as a form of parasitism. And really good parasitism becomes symbiotic relationships. Like if you look at a lichen, that's both a fungus and an algae. And the algae is providing food to the situation, the fungus is providing a more effective breeding strategy to the point where they've evolved so they can't exist without the other. Another really good example would be an anemone fish. You've got a great big venomous anemone, and you've got fish that are immune to the anemone that are keeping the anemone clean, and they're attracting prey. So both sides are benefiting. Really bad parasitic situations, the parasite damages the host to the point where the host dies, and the parasite's scrambling around trying to find another host. And what you kind of hope is that they convergently evolve to where they can exist together. Look at syphilis. In the 15th century, when syphilis first arose in Europe, if you contracted it, within about 4 or 5 months, body parts were literally falling off of you. And your entire nervous system was really deteriorated from the inside out. Getting syphilis now is nowhere near as big a health threat. As a matter of fact, only about a quarter of the cases go tertiary and cause neurological damage. So, the two humans and the spirochete that causes syphilis sort of evolved together to emerge to where there's not as much damage to the host. So I kind of look at relationships like that. I also have been married twice. First time so long ago, I really don't remember much about it. I mean, we're friends on Facebook, and that's about it. I wish her well. She lives in Virginia someplace. Second time I got married, I was married in this room right over there by him. So I hold him somewhat accountable for his fault. 3 years later, I was a resident in this back room because in between those 2 points was a gruesome shit show I wouldn't have wished on anybody. So, I be super careful. But one thing I will say is the relationship between the Dharma and the relationship is in a lot of ways the Dharma has become my refuge from relationships. It certainly wasn't that second marriage when I said I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. That was exactly what I did to recover from that marriage. And your mileage may be radically different. I hope it is.
The parasitic relationship I like is the bird and the crocodile, the alligator, where they clean the teeth.
Oh, they clean the teeth.
You have to wonder when the first one happened. The last bird was eaten by the crocodile. Would have been me. Right?
No,
Who's the next bird?
First time the crocodile realized, man, this is really cool not to have a mouth full of leeches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'll just let it go.
Yeah.
Wonderful thing.
I was another one who was married twice. First marriage happened in the Zen Center over there by Clear McClendon.
Falling.
Yes, it's his call again, and of course got a great son out of it. But we're still friends too. But my second wife, we've been married now for 18 years. Next week is the anniversary, so I better not forget that. She's my favorite parasite. I'm her favorite parasite. We've she followed me wherever I went a lot of places. But the one thing that I found out is that it's the intimacy and everything is great and important too. But the thing about it is, it's only great and important and useful if it's not something that you absolutely have to crave, and because it becomes that attachment, this, that, and the other. This thing I have to have this. My wife and I've been celibate for the past 4 years now. And it's not, it's just a choice. It's not something that has happened. It's just a choice because we love each other and we don't need that particular part of our relationship to prove it. But so, plus we don't need more children. We're grown, ours grown, they're out, we're happy. But beyond all that, that's the thing about it is that we've maintained this relationship by walking in the middle. We're not too possessive of each other. We know we let each other go, but we don't let go to the point where people wonder, "Hey, are you still married?" It's like an interplay between these two things.
Yeah.
So it's just been one of those things. We love and adore each other to death. We die for each other. And I wish she watches crime shows a lot. I think she takes notes. But beyond that, uh, you know, we live our lives.
Good, good.
It works.
So let me go online. Let's take turns. White Willow, anybody online have something to say or ask? Another dimension of this is considering your parents' marriage, what you witnessed with your parents. I have some things to say about that. Anyone online? Are you still there? Hello?
Still here. No comment.
Any comment or question? I saw Corolla. I don't know if anybody else is online. We don't see the gallery view here. I guess we can do gallery view.
Joe, I'm showing 5 people online.
Okay, well, do you have a comment or question or anybody else on the subject?
I do not. Thank you.
We have one here. Cyrus.
Yeah, I just want to throw in about so I believe that mythology is not just fake, and there's
Did you say mythology?
yeah mythology. So there are different myths, and so there's this myth of I think it's a myth. It's just like a child story, but the princess finds this frog and then kisses the frog, and then the frog turns into a prince. Uh, so I read that or I heard that the description that the meaning behind this story is that the husband he's supposed to be extremely uh, disgusting, like a frog, and you really don't want to kiss the frog. But if you can do it, if overcome and look at your other person as and see all these flaws as something good, the frog will turn into a prince. And then the relationship between a man and a woman, especially in this story, is really not about the husband or the wife. It's about life, because uh, life is not that fun either sometimes. And if you look at it with the negative, it's all everything's half empty and nothing is good. Then uh, life will be a frog. But if you look at it, if you kiss the life and embrace it,
Yeah.
it will turn into something very beautiful.
I've never heard that interpretation of it, but that makes a lot of sense to me. Three things a couple of things I want us to consider. Again, your parents, and as modeling marriage for you as you were a child growing up, and then the long tradition in Buddhism of celibacy, um, it, if you think about it, there's no way to make the argument that Buddhism is a cause with interest in the preservation of the species if it emphasized celibacy. The quickest way to end the species, the next generation isn't born. The human race is gone. If everybody went celibate, there would be no next generation. So it's a little hard to rationalize Buddhism as kind of a campaign in support of the survival of the species. It's sort of not there. And it seems to be that the vow to live a celibate life. We had 3 Vietnamese nuns living here, and I talked with some of them. They told me their life stories and different things, and they had opportunities to marry, and their family wanted them to marry, and they had husbands picked out and things like that. And they turned their back on it. They made a conscious decision not to do that. And one of them explained to me she had a kind of epiphany. It occurred in the presence of a teacher. She sort of heard the Dharma, and that's when she turned to the path that she followed. And so you have to really consider, was that a sacrifice? Is that a sacrifice? Or did that person do the wise thing? You, when you were too young and had children and so forth, what were you thinking? Kind of thing. Those are 2 kind of dimensions to this I think we can consider. We're householders, so we don't follow the path of the monastic path directly, but we sort of have it as a benchmark for comparison. Right?
I can't speak on the being married, but my parents had a pretty rough divorce. And something that I always looked at was how my sister and I in our relationship to each of those parents during the divorce and like just how I think they approached the marriage. It was my mom's second marriage. Her husband before had passed. It was my dad's first marriage. And during the divorce, my sister and I remained very close to our mom, and things fell apart with my dad. And I think my dad's the one who initiated, well, I know he's the one who initiated the divorce to marry his current wife.
Were you from the prior marriage or from this one? Your sisters?
I was from the second marriage. My mom and her first husband did not have children.
Okay.
And it took me a long time to really think about, because my sister always kind of wondered, I think she was a lot younger, why that was. Like, why, if the marriage wasn't working, why are we still mad at him for initiating it? Because it was not what people consider a successful marriage. And I think that I always looked at my mom was someone who kind of never really tried to control us or him or like our lives. And my dad was someone who, much like his parents, you go to college, you get married, you have the job, you just, there's like life and you have to fit in that box. And my mom is someone who I think was just very go with the flow of like, like your children are not your children. Like she was just definitely has always been like, if you want to work at McDonald's, just be the best McDonald's employee you can be. As a Catholic, I take you to church, but whatever you want to do when you're an adult, that's your choice. And I think that that's something that I've observed just as an outsider, I think, to marriages and stuff like that. It's, I think some people have a marriage where it's like, this is a container that needs to be filled, and I have to put a spouse in it. I want to get married. I want to have a barn wedding with little jars, and this is the dress I want to wear. And this man has to be there. It doesn't matter who he is, he just needs to be there.
Yeah.
And then there are people who, have a spouse who hates attention. So they're like, all right, let's just go to the courthouse and get married. If you don't want to be the center of attention, let's just go do that. And I think that that's something that, for me, it's helped me understand that, like, I don't necessarily want to get married, but I'm not completely shut off to the idea. I think it's just, that person's supposed to augment and make your life better. It's not a necessity. It's not something to be felt. And I think that that's something that it took my dad's second marriage to understand that my mom had already, I, think, come to terms with.
I think marrying into a situation where there's already children, like if you a woman with her daughter or son, daughters and sons marrying into that, I think it's just that much more complicated.
Mhm.
And that's why, I caution people when they're entering into that kind of marriage to, you're really going to have to be selfless in this situation because those bonds are already established and those connections and,
Yeah.
you know, habits of the relationship are already.
And that was the problem. My stepmom had children as well, and they tried to make us a Brady Bunch sort of family unit.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
my siblings and I were having WWE, WrestleMania, fight, just physical fights. Like we were not getting along. And I think it was just, and it's been interesting to watch my stepsister get remarried and have to kind of resist that urge to be like, well, we are a happy family unit where her kids are like, we have a dad. We love our stepdad. We think he's great. He's our stepdad. And I think that that's been the cohesive, like my stepsisters and my stepmom. To me, they're my family. But I have like my mom and then I have my stepmom. And that's not to say that she's not lesser. It's just a different position.
Yeah.
It's like mom's already been, like, I already have a mom. And it's like, but she's been in my life since I was like 12. So it's, and she's been someone who's I love very much and is very much in my life. It's just, I think, willing to kind of accept the flexibility of family and like what that means to people. And like, you just can't ignore things that are unpleasant when I look in those relationships.
It's really hard to sort out which of these things are culturally conditioned and which things are more biological or natural. The time I met Matsuo Kuroshi, my kids were 4 or 5 years old, something like that. And I could tell everything was falling apart. This wasn't going to last. He was very good at helping me through it. He said, Zen is not really against divorce. He said it depends on whether everybody will be better off after. And that's very much what Buddha was said to have said when people consulted with him about tribe wanting to wage war on a neighboring tribe. He said if both sides will be better off after the war, it can be considered a just war. But how do you know? How do you know for sure? So let's jump back to online. Anybody online want to jump in? Can't see you anymore. What did I do? Hello? Can't hear you. All I did was change the view. I don't think that should have changed everything. John, anything? Anybody online want to say something or ask?
Oh, Joe, I'm on the road this morning, so I'm not able to talk like
Oh.
I usually do. I'm sorry.
No
But
problem.
my phone says there are 5 other participants.
Valerie, you're in charge. Anybody else want to say something? We take turns here.
I don't think I have anything that would further the conversation. It's been very interesting. And I'm glad it's not taboo to talk about, divorce and those kind of things. So that's always good to know and hear.
It's painful, but I think in community practice, Sangha, I think we sort of have to address these things.
And I appreciate that.
I think celibacy in the history of Buddhism was mostly for simplicity. It's just a whole lot simpler way to live if you're 300 or 400 of you all in the same monastery. In other words, I don't think it was a moral prescript, nothing like that. Oh, you have to introduce your name.
And Michael, from Chapel Hills.
Oh, Chapel Hill. Say hi to Joshua. Yeah.
I just wanted to share probably about 15 years ago, my wife and I got to know a couple who were both therapists, and it was a lot of fun to watch them interact with each other because they had this stance that there's John, there's Lena, and there's the relationship. And I would really talk out loud about it in this way, but the relationship was the third thing that had to be nurtured that didn't take away necessarily from what each person wanted. Just to kind of see them in that, so that was helpful to us. We'd only been married a couple of years at that point. Um, it wasn't something that I think at that time I had the idea that, well, I need to compromise or give something up. And indeed, that is sometimes what is called for. But I think if I started to think about, well, what does the relationship need from us as members of it, it helped to let my ego drop a bit.
Yeah. I took an all to similar kind of view, I think, with my children. My first marriage, and Diane married into that situation. Well, we already had 2 children. Finally had to relate to my son and my daughter by saying, I cannot relate to your mother through you, and I cannot relate to her, to you through her. I can relate to you, and you can relate to me. We keep this line straight. Maybe we'll be, able to be all right. Because triangulation starts to happen. The children become a pawn in the situation, and they learn to manipulate. Unfortunately.
Alexa, twice divorced, 3 children, 3 grandchildren. Oldest daughter died in a car wreck when she was 17. She said there's trauma. Um, and that marriage was already over at that point. But as I've watched any number of couple go through divorce, usually pretty awful stuff, and they say awful things to each other. And I look at the math up, and in this country, I don't know how it is in other countries, you're gonna 50% of you are gonna get divorced. If you marry again, you're gonna lose out 85%. And there's not a bookie in Las Vegas that will take those off. Why do we keep doing it? I've been single now for 18 years. I don't particularly like it. I can't even give a date, and that's okay. I'm not asking to be.
We're not going to help you with that.
But
we're not going to help you with that.
No, and I don't expect. I've had a couple of close calls. That was it. But I think, what is it? Is there an answer to that? I mean, are there other cultures that have a much lower divorce rate because they do something differently?
I'm sure.
In India, arranged marriages actually don't have a very low divorce rate.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I think America 100 years ago had a lower divorce rate.
Yeah.
But 100 years ago here in America.
Well, I feel like that was probably, there's a little bit of a difference with that simply because there wasn't no fault divorce. Like you couldn't just get divorced. You had to prove, a woman had to prove abuse or other things like that. Also, women could not have bank accounts,
Right.
credit cards. So divorce didn't happen because women couldn't leave. That was part of that. This is a more modern study of specifically arranged marriages versus marriages, quote unquote, for love, and just that kind of understanding of looking at people who are I want to be with you, maybe a more physical, or there's a plethora of reasons to get together romantically, but when you're kind of arranged, it's kiss, be married, that's it. That's your person, and you kind of have to just figure it out. And so I think that's what they're trying to do. That's what I think you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. So I think what I'm hearing is, and this is true, I think culturally we tend to look at divorce as a negative. There were times when I thought, and I told my parents, I think you guys should get divorced, and be better than this or whatever. So, what do you have to say about the upside to divorce? Is there an upside?
Getting divorced? Yeah, because this second marriage I was, one of us was going to wind up in a shallow grave in the outskirts of town. The other one was going to prison had we not gone.
Did you try picking leeches?
He married into.
Was it?
Did you try picking leeches out of each other's mouths? Like an bird?
He married into a mother-child relationship, so that's That's part of the
I never
controversy.
saw her with a very big parasite load, so no, I never did this. Good question, though. Yeah, interesting.
I think we live in a society, first of all, where the paradigm has changed. Instead of working on something that's broken, we throw it away. We get that idea of people as objects as opposed to people. We're taught in society to objectify.
Yeah.
And that becomes a substitute for relationship bonds. You know, what was the old saying? It was women trade women trade sex for love, and men trade love for sex. Was an old saying, which is a terrible way to think of things because that it makes it makes every relationship that you're in transactional, and the bonds of matrimony are supposed to were designed to actually take two people, and make them one flesh, and one person. And then there are various degrees of what happens in that relationship and how you deal with the things that you're going through. But as a society, we're taught differently from that. We live in a society that is about instant gratification, a masturbatory society, whereas it's self gratification, which from the church that I just retired from was self abuse. That's a very good way of looking at that. But we trade those intimate moments between one man and one woman for only focusing on the physical outcome of that act, and we lose all sense of reality. I think we lose all sense of propriety when we just do that. This is supposed to be an act that you share between someone that you love so much that you just want to. That's the only person you want to be with. They're your flesh.
If you look at that precept, it says, honor the body, do not engage in sexual misconduct. And you have to decide what is sexual misconduct in your own life. And if you look at the animal kingdom, the insect kingdom, it's all over the map. What would sexual misconduct be
What would it be?
let's say,
Engaging in a sexual act with a partner that didn't have a full understanding of what was going on. That would be what I would consider sexual misconduct.
within the insect or animal kingdom?
I don't think an animal would be capable of understanding what was happening when it would that be.
So it's all sexual misconduct.
Yeah.
They're a fish. I understand they're a fish who change from female to male.
Yeah.
In the process of having.
Yeah, parrotfish. What they do through their life cycle, they go through as they reach sexual maturity. There's a male form, and then even the next step of maturity is a female form. And if you're on a coral reef, you'll see all of them intermingled together. Yeah, that's kind of
Funny, the ancient meme in Buddhism was the other way around. If you were born a female, you had to be reborn a male to become enlightened.
yeah. I don't know. Yeah, but that kind of changing in gender. There's a lot of species of frogs that do it as well. And if you went into like a big population of some species of frogs and removed all the females, what would happen is you'd come back a year later, and so.
So it's kind of a fluid space in nature.
Well, I think it's a fluid space in humans too. It's just not fluid the same way.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the current political controversy over trans people being in sports and so forth.
I don't know why you'd be so afraid of another person being happy, but I guess some people are that way.
Oh,
I've been trying to like formulate a question because like I'm going through divorce right now. It's very complicated.
everything is a question.
Yeah. So I'm just like my mind's like.
And you're in residency here.
I am. Yep.
It's the best place for you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we should advertise it. Divorce? Yeah, going through a divorce?
Yes. I wanted to ask.
Yeah, you're going through a divorce. We'll give you two things: directions to IKEA and a room here. Seriously, go to IKEA any given day, and there's going to be dudes wandering around with a shopping cart with this vacant, she threw me out look on their face. I mean, that's what IKEA is looking like. You think I'm kidding, but anytime you want to get together and talk,
Love that.
I'd be available to do that. Yeah.
I hate IKEA, not for that reason, but because they sell junk as furniture, and I'm a furniture designer.
What was wrong with furniture?
Junk as furniture, they sell, ticky tacky, and you assemble it,
Yeah.
and if you try to move it and disassemble it, it tears itself apart. That's
Well, yeah, and
part
then
of the
plus
plan.
they don't have to play it. And the directions and the act of putting that stuff together, that's all the proof we need of a Judeo-Christian hell. Yeah. Spend your eternity putting together IKEA furniture if you don't live right.
The example of Buddhist impermanence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then the father, mother, maybe both who get into having children and they have to buy the bicycle and have to assemble the bicycle and they can't find the bolt and they can't. For what you wish for.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about, I'm not really sure if this is related with just males and females, but we talked about animals too. But uh, so I think what got me started thinking about this is that there was another Alan Watts quote. He said that everything indoors is straight lines and everything outdoors is wiggly. So it's like you get the branches and the leaves and they wiggle in the wind. But then you come in and then you just have straight line. Yeah, here we got a couple of fans that's moving. And maybe you have like a dog or some other human running around inside. Well, otherwise everything is just solid. And uh, but I was thinking like we it's everything indoors is actually kind of manufactured by other humans, and I think that our lives are also very manufactured, and the only thing you can't, the only time we can kind of get away from the manufactured life is when we have sex with each other. Then you can turn into an animal, and basically, if you fuck your brains out, that's the best way to do it. Uh, and then fucking your brains out, that's that you're a pure animal. Uh, but I think that they're like whenever you're running around and talk to people, and if you start to behave uh, like an animal, basically that is not allowed. And yeah, so I've been thinking about that, like because I think that a lot of people they take suicide and so forth, and they take these pills, and maybe they feel good when they take the pills, but maybe it's just today's life that it's just so little animal left that we take the pills instead, and then we can continue to kind of walk around in this antiseptic life, and uh, yeah. So I've been thinking about this thing. And also the thoughts that you have in your mind, which we do when we meditate, it is not a straight line.
Hopefully.
Yeah, right.
And Matsuoka Roshi would often say, civilization conquers us. So we have to do something as extreme as Zen to reorient ourselves to our natural life. But if you think about not only sexuality, but even just biology, I mean, eating.
Yeah.
In India, people still are defecating outside on the street, in public. And they have laws against that. They're trying to stop them from doing it. I guess they urinate in the river, Ganges or something, I don't know. But none of these biological practices at one time were prohibited or thought of as being something you shouldn't do in public because everybody was in public. We lived in a jungle. Yeah. So something had to be done. And as your I mean, you had to accommodate that. That's just nature. My corpses were put out in the charnel grounds, lying there rotting right in front of everybody. So we hide everything away now. We tuck everything away, trying to keep everything clean. We no longer hunt and kill our own food. But if you think about it, eating in public should be prohibited along those lines. You know? I don't like watching people eat in a restaurant. Do you? I mean,
Right.
I like it when I'm eating in a restaurant, but pretty gross, really. I mean, you're shoving this stuff in here. Why couldn't we just live on air? Well,
So I've been pondering this whole topic of Zen and relation. Uh, persevering with Zazen and persevering laying their heart attention. In Zazen, when you sit, it's all about what the next thing is that comes out of the unconscious. If you're unwilling or unable to deal with what comes up, Zazen stops. But no different than relationship. That relationship, I think, more than, at least for me, more than any other experience, acts the same way. It really brings up what you hold inside you. If you're not willing or able to deal with what comes up, it's over. So it's really all about me in both. The same. It's being able and willing to deal with what is inside you. If you can't do that, you can't sit and you can't be in a relationship. That brings for me. Yeah.
separation of self and other. I have a radical sense of humor. I don't know where it came from, but I tend to think our stand-up comics are the closest thing we have to Zen masters today because they just cure everything. You know, did you ever notice everybody laughs because they recognize the truth of what they're saying? So I imagine, and like Jonathan Katz is a friend of Diane, so we have some comic friends. So you start to think about that world of George Carlin, how you know how they go there. They go there, right? They go someplace that most of us inhibit ourselves from going, and they talk about all this. So I have these comic skits in mind. God's design team. I come from a design background. We work in teams, right? And they're deciding how the peak of their creation, the human being, is going to reproduce. So it's been given as an assignment from on high, and all the team is debating this, how we're going to do this. So they come up with this idea, and like any mammal, and several in the committee are repulsed by this, aghast at the idea. The one would have an innie, one would have an outie. You got to stick the outie into the innie, and just like any cow or any dog or any. Can't they just separate like an amoeba, you know, nice and clean, separate into two? Can't we find some other way of doing this for the pinnacle of our great creation, who after all is in the image of God, or God is in our image, probably more likely. Anyway, you can run that scenario through here. What would the debate have been? And again, if you look at nature, there's every possible kind of reproduction out there that I could think of. I can't think of any of them really. How many are there, would you say, Mike?
What's that? How many animals?
Kinds of reproduction that are different. There's the mammals are very similar, and then you have the ones who have.
You know, there's two. There's asexual and sexual. You know, and like when you said divide like an amoeba, the problem there is that the genetic material stays the same on both sides. The advantage of sexual reproduction is that you have a much wider variety of genetic material across population.
Hybrid.
Yeah, so you know, if you have a really wide range of genetic material, that's going to be more of the population may have resistance to different kinds of pathogens. You know, they can respond better to change.
The recessive traits are repressed, and
Well, if your environmental conditions all change and it turns out the recessive genes were adaptive, then that's what drives evolution. But the weird thing is there's this thing called genetic drift, which means that if you give it enough time, the entire population is going to drive toward homogeneity. That you'll have so little uh, genetic variety that the species itself is going to be doomed. Species typically live for about 10 million years. That's kind of the average lifespan of a species. And you can pick species now that there's so little genetic variation that it's a question of what that species survival is going to look like. Cheetahs are a perfect example. There's really so little genetic variation from cheetah to cheetah that one bad virus could wipe everything out because they've been through millions of years of genetic drift.
Well, Joseph, you hadn't said anything, which I
I've never been married. My parents were divorced. I definitely try to respond to some of the Schopenhauer material because it is an interesting. I guess I have to point out he is a pessimist, right? Like,
I'm sure you read it.
well, I would encourage us to recognize like everyone's got their own perspective on men and women. You know what I mean? And that like the things we say and the way we feel about it reflect our own point of view. And might be maybe the deepest dharmic thing here. I think is like in my mind, being in a relationship is about trying to liberate somebody else, right? Like from your own expectations about them. And so I don't know. That's my little thought.
That's an interesting analogy you draw there at the end of that formula, because that was how the Nagarjunas, Madhyamikas, and Prasangikas did debate. Their purpose of the debate was to help the other person disabuse themselves of their own assertions and confusion and actually have an enlightenment experience. It was the highest level of purpose for a debate. It wasn't about winning or beating another person in public. It's exactly what you're saying should obtain in a relationship.
I really like what you just said about freeing other people from your own expectations, because probably the question I have gotten as long as I've been here more often than anything else isn't being in love and being in a relationship attachment? And I always say that I don't think that it is. I think that what love really is the highest degree of attention that we can pay to something else or to someone else. And attachment is demanding a certain outcome. So I think it's very different. No, I think you just nailed it.
And along those lines, I think it was Fritz Perls, it was one of the transactional analysis. He said, I did not come into this lifetime to live up to your expectations. You did not come into this lifetime to live up to mine. But if we meet in the middle, we're still
Great. My granddaughter is 41 years old. When she was 38, she decided that there was not a person that she had enough interest in to live with the rest of her life, much less raise children. So she did the in vitro thing, and with a high-powered job, and no partner. And it's hard. It's really hard. Yeah, I give her the help that I can. And she gave us twin boys almost 4 years ago. I've never been so in love with two humans in my life. They are just they are exceptional. They already have signs of intelligence that are way beyond anything I have. So and she also has she won't even call him a boyfriend, but a male friend that they adore each other. It's they don't have sex. He loves the boys. That just skews a lot of what we've been talking about. If a relationship is to procreate, this is something that here's one person who's doing something really different. And if somebody said to me, "This is going to be the new standard. Here's how we're gonna have procreation," I'd say, "Yeah, I'd vote for that." She's very happy with herself, the boys. and God knows I'm happy with the boys. I have another grandchild who lives in Seattle from my first marriage, and I can't say that her existence. She's 28 or 29. That her existence uh, is not and the quality of her life, insofar as society is concerned, is not because I was madly in love with my first wife, and that marriage lasted about 4 years. That was it, done. Uh, so there's a new mixture, and it's technology based. Um, because doing in vitro, when they first started doing it, it was very tricky business. Yeah. Frequently failed. And in fact, she had one shot at it, and there was one egg left out of 16. And here they came, 6 pounds apiece.
Right.
And whoever said the thing about the size of the uterus, yeah.
My mother said she tried to abort me. They'd already had 2 children, a beautiful son, a beautiful daughter. So she jumped off the back porch trying to abort me. And I told her I got my revenge. So they came out upside down. I had a huge head. Everything went to my head. She jumped off the porch.
Yeah, no, he never met my sister, who was the biggest baby ever delivered at
Really?
the hospital. Hmm.
Oh.
And my mom was a very, very small person.
So how do we feel about these alternative choices that people are making now in alternative families, alternative relationships, and many in the younger generation are choosing intentionally not to get married, not to have children, so forth.
That's kind of where I feel called to, where I'm open to being in a relationship, but I feel really called to. Avoidance isn't the right. It's almost like we have paradox of choice in a lot of ways. Where things are less organic than they used to be, and things are very. Someone mentioned it earlier, objective, object driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why, as of a year and a half ago, I chose to choose a life of celibacy. I'll never say never, but just because we don't know. But I'm seeing it a lot more in my generation too, where it's just hard to have a genuine relationship. And as far as the spiritual path goes, my practices have I found it's hard to be in a relationship because it's hard to find someone there's very little time in my day outside of my practices for relationships, and I had a breakup of relationship last year specifically for that, where it was going well, but and part of that too is I had a question married with that where. Since then, marrying it opens with the great way is not difficult for those not attached to preferences. I've had a few people break up with me because that's how I live my life, and that I don't have a problem with it, but a lot of other people have a problem with. Do you want to do this or this? And it's
all of this can be threatening to the status quo. It can be threatening to people's worldview of how they want things to be.
Yeah.
I think the history of Buddhism has been not quite agnostic on this, has been very aggressively pursuing what are the possibilities and what really works. But Zen is nothing, it's not practical. Okay, well, thank you all for responding. I think this is the first subject everybody's responded to. It doesn't mean I'm going to repeat this subject in the future. So let's close with the 4 vows as we usually do. Invite everybody to stay for lunch. Ian has cooked up a wonderful menu for us today. Beings are numberless. I vow to freedom. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize that beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you for your patience and listening. Remember, June 11th to 15th is the watershed retreat. I will be leading a watershed retreat that Wednesday through Sunday. And other things upcoming, please check your calendar.